Welcome to Trinity Church the Nazarene, and thank you for joining us in this Seder Meal. I'm Pastor Amanda Sparrow.
And I'm Pastor J. Dylan Proctor.
And so like I said, today we're going to learn a little bit about the festival of Passover and go through the Seder plate. In the Jewish tradition, this is the celebration of the escape from Egypt. It remembers how God redeemed the people of Israel out of their bondage and their journey towards the Promised Land. For Christians, the celebration includes Jesus sitting down with his disciples to celebrate the festival and instituting what we now call the Lord's Supper. The Thursday before Easter is when we celebrate the Last Supper. This Thursday is also referred to as Maundy Thursday. Maundy comes from the Latin and means mandate or commandment. In John chapter 13, verses 34 through 35, Jesus says, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Today we celebrate God's great love for us. The love that redeemed Israel from slavery, the love that sat down with those who would betray him and wash their feet, and the love that continues to call us towards salvation and healing even today.
Let us begin with an opening prayer. God of the covenant, as we celebrate the beginning of the Paschal feast, we come to the table of the Lord in whom we have salvation, life, and resurrection. Renew the power of this mystery in our service to one another and to you, so that with Christ we may pass from this life to the glory of your kingdom. Amen.
So before the Passover, families take time to clean the house of all leaven, and that's why we have this feather here, represents that cleaning. In the Bible, leaven is often used as a symbol for sin, and so that is another reason why we make sure we clean it for this special festival. And as we have prepared the space, let us prepare our hearts and minds for the celebration.
And before the beginning of every Sabbath or Jewish holiday, it is traditional for the women of the household to light a candle in honor of the holiness of the day. Here we go.
After the lighting of the candle, there is a blessing that is said.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us that we kindle the Yom Tov, which means holiday, lights.
All right, there are 4 cups to drink with this celebration of Passover. So you notice that we have cups of grape juice here. In the blessings, you may hear it referred to as wine, but as good Nazarenes, we'll just have Welch's grape juice.
Yes.
But as you notice, ours are quite full. However, when you do this at home, probably only pour yourself a little bit because you, like we said, there's 4 cups and you're supposed to drink the whole cup each time. So there is a blessing that is read over the juice. It says, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has kept us in life, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this season." Then we hold the cup and we read, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine." And then we drink the first cup.
And the next thing of importance is the ritual hand washing. Now, in many traditions, the water is poured from a cup once each hand is held over the sink or basin while reciting a blessing in preparation to eat the parsley dipped in salt water. Now, we're going to do this a little bit differently. Since we're in video format, we're going to actually ask that you pause the video right now and go and wash your hands. And we're going to do the same thing here. And now that we've come back together, we recite this blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with your laws and commanded us to wash our hands.
All right, so in your packet that you received, if you've gotten one from Trinity or if you're doing this at home, you should have 3 pieces of matzah or saltine crackers. And we have ours wrapped in a napkin. And part of this at the beginning of the celebration is that you take the middle matzah, so find that middle one, and you break it in half. I'm going to try to do that without making too much of a mess. There we go. And you're going to put half back into the napkin that you have with the others, and you're going to take the other half and hide it. Now this is called the Afikomen, which means dessert, and it is put aside. A tradition in many families is to go hide it right now, and then at a certain point in the meal, children will go and try to find it, and they will try to redeem it for a prize. And so if you are doing this with friends or family or anyone else that's gathered with you, and one of you wants to go hide it, have the rest of them close your eyes, pause the video, go hide the Afikomen, and then you can resume the video when you get back.
Now that we have broke the middle matzah, now it is time for us to tell the story of the Passover. There arose in Egypt a Pharaoh who knew not of the good deeds that Joseph had done for that country. And thus he enslaved the people of God and made their lives harsh through servitude and humiliation. This is the basis for the Passover holiday, which we commemorate with these different rituals today.
And so we start with the first thing on our Seder plate, which is the parsley or vegetable. And it is dipped in salt water and then eaten. The parsley symbolizes both the humble origins of the Jewish people as well as the rebirth of spring, which is starting now. The salt water, of course, symbolizes the tears shed during our slavery. And before eating the vegetable, we recite a blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the earth. Then you take your parsley, or it may be celery or another bland vegetable, dip it in the salt water, and you eat it.
And the next thing in our order is 4 questions. Now, the youngest child that is old enough to talk, or really any individual can serve this role, but if you have children and you have some that are of the right age where they can do this, the youngest child that is old enough to talk will ask these 4 questions. And the first is, on all other nights we eat either bread or matzah. On this night, why only matzah? And the second question is, on all other nights we eat herbs or vegetables of any kind. Why on this night only bitter herbs? And the third question, on all other nights we do not dip even once. On this night, why do we dip twice? And the fourth question, on all other nights we eat our meals in any manner. On this night, why do we sit around the table together in a reclining position? And the answer to these questions are as follows. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and God brought us out with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. And if God had not brought our ancestors out of Egypt, we and our children and our children's children would still be subjugated to Pharaoh in Egypt. Even if we were all old and wise and learned in Torah, we would still be commanded to tell the story of Exodus from Egypt. And the more we talk about the Exodus from Egypt, the more exemplary we are.
So this is where we get to now into the 10 plagues. So while the Jews endured harsh slavery in Egypt, God chose Moses to lead them out to freedom. Moses encountered God at the burning bush and then returned to Egypt to lead the people out of it. He demanded that Pharaoh let the Jewish people go, but Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to let the Jewish people go. On our Seder plate, we have a boiled egg. This represents Pharaoh's heart. Like Pharaoh, we can refuse to listen to God and ignore his call to righteousness. This disobedience is what we call the hardening of our hearts, and that is why God sent the 10 plagues. It is a tradition to remove 10 drops of wine from our cups as we recite the 10 plagues as a remembrance that while the Jews were redeemed through these plagues, people did suffer. So at this part in the celebration, what you can do is either take, if you have some leftover parsley, or your finger, and you dip it in your cup and then drop it onto your plate. What we're going to do is drop it onto a napkin.
Alrighty.
And so we'll say the name of each of the 10 plagues, and then for each of the plagues, you'll take a drop out of your cup, let it fall onto the napkin. So we have the first plague, which is the plague of the blood. Then the frogs.
And the frogs.
The gnats.
The nets.
The flies. Cattle disease.
The cattle.
Boils.
The boils.
Hail.
The hail.
Locusts.
The locust.
Darkness.
The darkness.
And finally the 10th plague, which was the death of the firstborn.
The death of the firstborn. And now we are going to read out of Exodus and read from the 10 plagues. And the first being blood. Exodus 7:20 reads, Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded. In the sight of Pharaoh and of his officials, he lifted up the staff and he struck the water in the river. And all the water in the river was turned into blood, and the fish in the river died. The river stank so that the Egyptians could not drink its water, and there was blood throughout the whole land of Egypt. But the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Pharaoh turned and went into his house, and he did not take even this to heart. And all the Egyptians had to dig along the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the river. Frogs. In Exodus chapter 8, verse 6, so Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same thing by their secret arts, and brought frogs up on the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, Pray, the Lord will take the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. Then Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried out to the Lord concerning the frogs that he had brought upon Pharaoh. And the Lord did as Moses requested. The frogs died in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields. And they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw a respite, he hardened his heart, and would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. And the third plague, gnats. In Exodus 8:16, then the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth, so that it may become gnats throughout the whole land of Egypt. And they did so. Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the earth, and gnats came on humans and animals alike, and all the dust of the earth turned into gnats throughout the whole land of Egypt. The magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, but they could not. There were gnats on both humans and animals. And the magician said to Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Then the fourth plague, the flies. In Exodus 8:24, the Lord did so, and great swarms of flies came into the house of Pharaoh and into his officials' houses. And in all of Egypt the land was ruined because of the flies. So Moses went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord did as Moses asked, and he removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his officials, and from his people, and not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, and he would not let the people go. And then the fifth plague, the cattle disease. In Exodus 9, then the Lord said to Moses, Go to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, Let my people go, so that they may worship me. For if you refuse to let them go and still hold them, the hand of the Lord will strike with a deadly pestilence your livestock in the field, the horses, the donkeys, the camels, the herds, and the flocks. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of the Israelites and the livestock of Egypt, so that nothing shall die that belongs to the Israelites. The Lord set a time, saying, Tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land. And on the next day the Lord did so. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but of the livestock of the Israelites not one died. Pharaoh inquired and found that not one of the livestock of the Israelites was dead. But the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he would not let the people go. And to the sixth plague, boils. In Exodus 9:8, then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Take handfuls of soot from the kiln, and let Moses throw it in the air in the sight of Pharaoh. And it shall become fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and shall cause festering boils on humans and animals throughout the whole land of Egypt. So they took soot from the kiln, and stood before Pharaoh. And Moses threw it in the air, and it caused festering boils on humans and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils afflicted the magicians as well as the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses. And the seventh plague, hail. In Exodus 9:22, then the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand towards heaven, so that hail may fall on the whole land of Egypt, on humans and animals and all the plants of the field in the land of Egypt. And then Moses stretched out his staff towards heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire came down to the earth. And the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt, So there was hail with fire flashing continually in the midst of it. And such heavy hail had never fallen in the land of Egypt since it became a nation. The hail struck down everything that was in the open field throughout all the land of Egypt, both human and animal. The hail also struck down all the plants of the field and shattered every tree in the field. Only the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were, was there no hail. So the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses. And to the eighth plague, locusts. In Exodus 10:12, then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt, so that the locust may come upon it and eat every plant in the land, all that the hail is left." And so Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night, and when morning came, the east wind had brought the locusts. The locusts came upon all the land of Egypt and settled on the whole country of Egypt. And such a dense swarm of locusts had never been before, nor shall ever be again. They covered the surface of the whole land, so that the land was black. And they ate all the plants in the land, and all the fruit of the trees, and everything that the hail had left. Nothing green was left, no tree, no plant in the field, in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh hurriedly summoned Moses and Aaron, saying, "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Do forgive me my sin just this once, and pray to the Lord your God that he will remove this deadly thing from me." So he went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. The Lord changed the wind into a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in all the country of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Into the ninth plague, darkness. In Exodus 10:21, then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand towards heaven, so that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand towards heaven, and there was a dense darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days they could not move from where they were. But all the Israelites had light where they lived.
Before the 10th plague, Moses warned the people of the coming Passover. We read in Exodus 12, verses 3 through 13. "Tell the whole congregation of Israel that on the 10th of this month they are to take a lamb for each family, a lamb for each household. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of this month. Then the whole assembled congregation of Israel shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on their 2 doorposts and on the lintel of their house in which they eat it. They shall eat the lamb that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. This is how you shall eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is the Passover of the Lord. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human beings and animals. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the house where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague shall destroy you, and I will strike the land of Egypt." Today, this is why we have a bone on our Seder plate. It is called the Pesach, which is the Passover sacrifice, represented by the lamb shank bone.
And now regarding the 10th plague, the slaying of the firstborn. In Exodus 12:29, at midnight the Lord struck down all of the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his officials, and in all the land of Egypt there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. Then he summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, "Rise up, go away from my people, both you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you said. Take your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone, and bring a blessing on me too." Following the slaying of the firstborn, Pharaoh allowed the people of God to leave. The people of God left Egypt in such haste that their dough did not rise, so they ate matzah. When Pharaoh changed his mind and chased after the Israelites, God miraculously caused the Red Sea to split, allowing the Israelites to cross safely. And when the Egyptians entered the sea, it returned to its natural state, and the mighty Egyptian army drowned.
So as we come to this part of the Seder meal, it is usually traditional that after hearing the story of the Exodus, we take time to sing a song of praise to God. There are lots of different traditional choices, but a couple song suggestions you may want to look up for you and your family as He has made me glad or great is thy faithfulness. If you would like, take time right now to pause this video and sing a song of thanksgiving to God.
Now it's time for the conclusion of the Majid and the second cup, and that is the storytelling section of the Seder. Tradition tells us that every generation we ought to look upon ourselves as if we personally had gone out of Egypt. Therefore, it is our duty to thank the one who performed all the miracles for generations past and present. And we also look with hope into the future, knowing God will continue to perform miracles. And the blessing that is then said over the second cup is this: Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. And now we drink the second cup.
The matzah blessing is recited at the beginning of the Seder meal. Tonight we're only going to eat matzah, but this is the blessing that would be said. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings us bread from the earth.
The matzah represents the hurried exodus from Egypt, wherein the Israelites left so quickly that their dough did not have time to rise. A specific blessing for matzah only said in the Seder meal is said right now. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his laws and his commandments to eat matzah. And now the matzah can be passed around the table and eaten. And I guess if it's all right, we'll just pull this one right off the top, because we all will need a little bit of matzah, and we're only going to eat a little bit now, so we'll come back for the rest of the meal.
Set that back. Try some. Now we go into eating the bitter herbs. There are two kinds of bitter herbs on your table. There's the inedible bitter herb that you will not eat in this meal. For today, it is represented as a piece of Swiss chard. It is edible, but it doesn't taste good. And like I said, we're not going to eat it as part of this celebration. This reminds us of the many times that our sorrows may seem too great. There is also the other bitter herb, which is called mor in the Hebrew. It is represented with the horseradish, and that reminds us of the bitter pain and suffering the Israelites went through as slaves in Egypt. There's a blessing said over the mor, or bitter herbs, and then we will try it together. And that's why you want to leave yourself a good portion of some of the matzah bread, because you'll use that to scoop that up. So hear this blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his laws and commanded us to eat the bitter herbs. So at this time, if you like, you can dip either your piece of matzah into the bitter herbs to try it, or if you want to do a little spoon. It is spicy, so if you're not used to that, just try a little bit.
All right. Oh, I don't want that much.
Yep. Oh, that's spicy.
Yes, that is quite bitter. Very bitter. Yeah.
Also, it might be a good time to point out as well, you may want to have, because you can only drink your juice when it's time, so if you're needing something, you might want a glass of water.
And that would be a good recommendation for this point.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now we're going to go to the matzah and cheroset sandwich. Each person makes a sandwich using 2 pieces of matzah with maror, or horseradish, and cheroset. Now, traditionally, cheroset is a mixture of nuts, fruit, wine, and spices. Today in our packet, and most of us in our homes, we're going to be using applesauce. And cheroset symbolizes the mortar used by the Jewish people when they had to make bricks whilst enslaved in Egypt. And maror and cheroset are eaten together to remind us of the sweetness that God brings even in the midst of the bitterness of life. So we'll get some more matzah.
So yeah, just take, if you have one big piece, you can kind of split it in half. And you just dip a little bit in there. And a little bit in there. Make yourself a sandwich.
Yeah,
And you eat it. This is where it gets really messy.
Yeah, this sounds like a lot of fun, especially with that horseradish in there.
Need a little more applesauce with that.
Yeah, it is bitter, but mine was mixed with in such a way that it was definitely sweet, but nonetheless bitter. And now we have the meal time. This is the time where you would actually share in a meal. And if you want, you can take time now and pause the video and share a meal with those around you. Traditionally, this is the place and time where the meal would be shared together. And now that we have done that, let us turn to the Afikomen and the unleavened dessert.
All right, so as we said, the piece of matzah that was put aside earlier as the Afikomen, or dessert, is now eaten. It is a tradition for people to hide it and then for children to go look for it. And then they can hold it for ransom. And the children who participated are usually rewarded at this point with a treat, usually candy or a small toy.
Yeah.
So if you haven't taken time for you to go find it, make sure you go find it now.
And now it is time for the grace after the meal. And the cup is refilled at this point, and now we say the Bikrat ha-Mazon, the grace after the meal. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sustains the entire world with goodness, grace, loving kindness, and compassion. He gives bread to all, for his grace is everlasting. And in his great goodness we have never lacked anything, and we will never be deprived of food, for the sake of his great name. For he is God who provides for all, and does good for all, and prepares food for all his creatures that he created. Blessed are you, Lord, who provides for all. God and God of our ancestors, may you remember us in this day. On this day of Passover, may you come and bless us with kindness and mercy for a life of peace and happiness. We pray that he who establishes peace in the heavens will grant peace for us, for all Israel, and for all mankind. And with that, let us say amen.
Traditionally, this is where we believe Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. We read in Mark chapter 14, verse 22. While they were eating, he took the loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it. He gave it to them and said, "Take, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to all of them and drank from it. He said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I tell you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God." So now a blessing is read over the third cup. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. Now we drink.
And now we have the welcoming of Elijah. The fourth and final cup of wine is now filled, but not drank until later. An additional cup is then going to be set aside for the prophet Elijah. And tradition says that Elijah, who will precede the arrival of the Messiah, makes an appearance at every Seder. Now we traditionally open up a door in the home to allow Elijah to enter, and we sing the song Eliyahu Haneva. Elijah the prophet, Elijah the Tishbite, Elijah the Gileadite. May he come speedily to us in our days, along with the Messiah, the son of David. And at this time, go to the door and see if Elijah is coming.
No, I think we're good. All right. After all this, the section from a psalm is recited, continuing our praise to God for redeeming our ancestors from Egypt and his continual protection. Hear the word of the Lord from Psalm chapter 118, verses 1 through 8. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. Let Israel say, his steadfast love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, his steadfast love endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, his steadfast love endures forever. Out of my distress I called on the Lord answered me and set me in a broad place. With the Lord on my side, I do not fear. What can mortals do to me? The Lord is on my side to help me. I shall look in triumph on those who hate me. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to put confidence in mortals.
And now for the fourth cup. The blessing over the fourth cup is, Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. And we drank the fourth cup.
So now we conclude the official part of the Seder with a final prayer, asking God to bring about the Messianic era when all of us will be gathered to Jerusalem and all humankind will dwell in peace. As we conclude, I do hope that this was meaningful for you and for those who have gathered around with you. This is a celebration. It's an ancient tradition that the Jewish people have celebrated for generations and thousands of years. It is one that the church has celebrated for over 2,000 years in remembering of the great sacrifice of Christ. And as we continue on this journey, I hope that, like I said, this was meaningful for you and you take time to not just enjoy the rest of your matzah and the bitter herbs and the applesauce, but to take time to talk with you, those gathered around with you, about what it means for God to interact with the rest of us and to bring us about into salvation. So hear this final blessing, this final hope, as we look to the future of what God is doing. We have finished the Passover Seder according to its precepts and customs. Next year in the New Jerusalem, next year, may we dwell in peace.